Hey there, my name is Kim Tricker, and I'm going to be talking today about my viz called The Houston Astros Did Not Win the 2017 World Series. I want to say a special thanks to Siddharth for inviting me to do this. It's a real honor to be part of the data viz community, and to be asked to be demonstrating my viz today is also very extremely flattering. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for watching the video, and I really hope you find it useful. So I'll get a little bit more into the details about the viz, but first I just want to introduce myself. So like I said, my name's Kim, and I live in Orlando, Florida. I work as a senior data analyst for a major payroll and HR solutions company. I was a Tableau Public featured author in Q2 of 2020, and I've been lucky enough to have a couple vizzes selected as viz of the day, and one of them is this Astros viz that I'll be walking you through. And if you're interested, you can also check out my Tableau Public profile, and you can see the other viz of the day that I did, which was selected back in September of 2019, and it was about the history of the tie in the NFL. So I really enjoy participating in Makeover Mondays and Sports Viz Sundays, and I really love sports and sports data in particular, so that's kind of what brought me into the Sports Viz Sunday community. And if you haven't heard of either of them, they're really great places for finding interesting data sets, challenging yourself to make appealing vizzes, and also to just give and receive feedback from the rest of the data viz community. So let me get into the viz now and a little bit of background about it. So I got my data from a Sports Viz Sunday data set that was posted in February 2020. The title may be a little bit misleading because the Astros did, in fact, win the 2017 World Series, but they likely only did so because of a major cheating scandal that they were found guilty of. And so the Viz looks into that cheating scandal. To sort of summarize that as best as I can, basically it was revealed somehow in around late 2019 that the Astros had installed a camera at the center of their home field pointing at home plate. And then the live feed from that camera was watched by someone in the dugout who was able to see the signs that the opposing catcher was giving to his pitcher. And if you're not familiar with baseball, these signs are like hand signs that indicate what kind of pitch the catcher thinks the pitcher should throw at the opposing batter. So the person or the people who were watching for the signs would signal to the batter what kind of pitch was coming by banging on the trash can. And then the batter would hear the bangs after the catcher gave the sign, and then they would know what kind of pitch to be expecting, and then that would improve the batter's chances of getting a run. So it's a pretty interesting story in the sports world, and I chose to dig into this data because I had heard about the Astros scandals but didn't really know very much about it. And the data set fascinated me, and I realized it was a really great opportunity for me to learn about what happened and be able to tell others about it too. I also really enjoy creating vizzes that tell a story, and I kind of saw this as an opportunity to continue to develop my skills in this type of storytelling visualization. So the data was collected by an Astros fan named Tony Adams, who's a very devoted and dedicated fan who watched every single pitch from the Astros 2017 regular season home games, which actually amounted to over 8,200 pitches. And he logged every time he heard a banging noise, which he actually heard about 1,100 of those. So I'm going to start by digging into the data, and you can see it here in data.world. Essentially, each line of the data set is an individual pitch thrown in the regular season home game, like I said, for the Astros in 2017. And it includes game level details like the date, the opponent, the final score, inning, top or the bottom of the inning, and then the batter and what happened at bat. This is the pitch level details here that we're getting into. What type of pitch it was, the category of the pitch, and then here is whether or not that pitch had bangs, and if it did, how many bangs. I believe it goes up to about 5 bangs, but those were a little less common than the 1 and the 2 bangs. A little bit more details, and then at the very end, you'll see the YouTube clip of that individual pitch, and that goes down for every single pitch. He was able to find the YouTube video of all of them and be able to log them. Okay, so now I'm going to flip back over to my Viz and kind of walk you through it. So here at the top, we've got the header, the title. This is a picture of Clayton Kershaw, the pitcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and that was the team that the Astros were playing against in the 2017 World Series. As you kind of come down on the Viz, I give a little bit of background on the scandal, and this is another picture I added of Jose Altuve, who was one of the star batters of the Astros. And if you click on this image, it'll actually take you to a video where some interesting examples of the scandal and a little bit more of an explanation of what really happened. Then I get into one of the biggest sections of my Viz, which is, oops, reloading. This is dedicated to all of the 8,200 pitches that Tony Adams logged, and each one of these dots represents a pitch, and it's arranged chronologically from the beginning of the end to the season. And you can see that the bangs actually become more prevalent towards the end of the season. You can see that they're kind of a little bit more scattered here, and then they become more frequent. Each of these dots is clickable, and it will take you to the YouTube video of the pitch. And also in the hover, you can see a little bit of info about the game, and then the pitch itself. Also, you can see how many bangs you should be listening for. So I'll just show you a quick example. I click this, it'll take me to the YouTube video. We won't watch it right now, but if you were to do that, you would listen for one bang on that particular pitch. This next section, I attempt to determine what kind of pitch would cause a banging sound. And I don't find any clear connections between the bangs and the type of pitch, but I do find that off-speed pitches tend to have more banging signals than fastballs do. And so then I kind of took that to mean that the bangs were intended to alert batters to an off-speed pitch. And sometimes they didn't get that right. A lot of the times they didn't get it right, perhaps. But with that assumption, I went over here and looked at the percentage of times that they were accurate in calling the off-speed pitches with the bangs. And you can see it's about 25, about a quarter of the time they are getting it right. A little blurb down here about why it might be helpful to alert a batter to an off-speed pitch. And then I go into this section where I look into which batters benefited most from the bang signals. This is a little bit of a, this took me a little bit of a workaround to be able to get this to look exactly how I wanted it to, and I will go through that with you a little bit later in the video. But I did highlight the players where their batting average was better with bangs than it was when there wasn't. And you can see the gray people, they actually had better batting averages when there were no bangs. This next section, I talk about what effect bangs had on plays. So at first I look at the percentage of at-bats that ended in a run for pitches with bangs and without bangs. And this, you can see here the splitters, which are a fastball, they occurred 38% of the time when there was a bang, a run would occur, as opposed to when there were no bangs, only 26% of the time that would happen. And you can use this heat map to see which types of pitches were actually more successful with and without bangs. And then in this graph here, I plot the number of Astros runs against the number of at-bats with audible bangs. And this is for every game of the season, colored by whether or not the Astros won. This was really eye-opening to me because you could see that there's a clear correlation, and this is a correlation / trend line showing the relationship between number of at-bats with audible bangs and the number of runs. And you can see that for the times that the Astros won, the correlation is actually pretty positive, whereas when they lost, it's pretty flat. Another blurb down here, and then I look at what effect did bangs have on games. So this is a graph of bar graph of every single game that they played, and then the number of at bats with audible bangs is the height of the bars. I split up the graph into thirds so I could show kind of the different chunks of the season, and it's pretty clear that there was like a point in time when the bangs started to really ramp up, and that seemed to be after the first third of the season. These lines here show the average number of at-bats with bangs, and at the beginning of the season it's only about 1.8 of at-bats had an audible bang, but then as you get into the middle it's as many as 24.8 and then 31.7. Then this is the percentage of times that they won. The color of these bars is actually the color of, it's indicating whether that the Astros won or lost. So red if they won, gray if they lost. And you can see that in the beginning of the season they won 63% of the time, which is actually a better win percentage than the middle and the end of the season when they were using more of the bang signaling. So that's it for the viz. I'm going to flip over to the actual workbook and show you how I built some of this. But first I want to take you into Figma and show you how I laid it out. Figma is a really great tool if you haven't heard of it. It is a great place to do some wire mapping for how you want to lay out your viz. You can even export this and save it as an image and use it as the background of your viz and float little graphs or images on top of your image. But this gave me like a good idea for how I wanted to structure my viz before I started building it in Tableau and being constricted by the tiling and having to reformat everything. With an idea like this, I knew how I wanted to build everything and what order I wanted to put everything in. Okay, so here's my viz in Tableau Public. One of the things you'll notice almost immediately, I think, is the difference in font. One thing you really want to keep in mind is that fonts don't always render like you want them to. So this looks like this is a serif font, maybe even Times New Roman, whereas here I'm using a sans serif font. So something to keep in mind when you're building your viz is the fonts may not always render like you want them to. There's a lot of really great articles out there for you to read about to understand kind of the differences between how different fonts render on the server versus the desktop, on a Mac versus Windows. It can be kind of intimidating, but there are definitely workarounds. And one of the safest things to do also is just to use the Tableau Public font, because that will render perfectly anywhere you put your viz. Okay, so you can see that the viz is tiled, no floating elements, and I'm going to jump into some of the actual visualizations. So this first one with the 8200 pitches, you can see it's actually kind of cut off. I can pull this down so that you can see more of it. But so nothing in the columns, nothing in the rows. All I did was put play ID onto the detail shelf and created circles, and that would create a circle for every single pitch ID. Then I just threw in the color of whether or not the pitch had bangs or not. And then all that was left to do is just throw in some stuff to the tooltip and format that the way that I wanted to. Then to set up the URL action, it's pretty simple. So we already have a field in here called YouTube URL. This is actually the link to the YouTube video. Just go to Worksheet, Actions. This is it right here, but you would go to Add Action, go to URL, and I'll show you how it's set up. If this sheet was set up with a column and a row, you would see some of those fields populated here, and you can choose which field you want people to click on. But in this case, there's only one field, and that's in the details, the pitch play ID. So whenever you click on that, take it to this field, which is a YouTube URL. If you wanted everything to go to google.com, you could just type in google.com here. But I wanted each one of these dots, because they have a unique URL, to go to the unique YouTube page. Set it up, and then now when you click, it'll take you to a YouTube video. Okay, so coming down to the next section. These two are pretty simple horizontal bar graphs. I'll show you how they look, but essentially what I have here is a broad grouping, which is the pitch type code group actually that I created, and then whether or not that the pitches in those groups had bangs. To create a group, and I'll show you what this looks like. So I grouped together all of these different codes into whether they were off-speed or fastball. There is a different grouping that the guy who created this data set used, but I wanted to kind of break them up into a little bit more broader category. So to create a group, you would just go to the field that you want to group, which I did with pitch type code, create group, and then I could group all of these together. Just shift and click, group, and then I can call it whatever I want. Use that grouping here, like I said, in the header, has bangs in the header, and then the axis of this graph is actually, if I show it to you, the number of instances of each of these occurring, and not the percentage like it's showing in the text. So I'm showing how you can use Tableau to show kind of two things here. One is how many times it happened, and then two is in the text you can see that percentage of times that it's happening. And I use color again to my advantage to show whether or not the pitch had bangs if it's red, no bangs if it's gray. Over here is a slightly different but pretty similar graph. Horizontal bar chart again, where we have on the axis the number of instances, and then in the text we're showing the percentages. This is just a colored horizontal bar graph. So you can see the breakdown of all of the change-ups. 561 you can see in the hover had no bangs, 206 had bangs, and then what percentage that makes up. Another little blurb down here. These are very simple. Just get the image where from online, add a text box. All right, so what batters benefited most from the bang signals? And I noted that this one was a little bit more complicated to do, although it's really not very complicated at all. So this is actually 4 different sheets, and I could have made this all maybe into 2 sheets, but for legibility and so that we weren't just scrolling endlessly for 19 players, so how many I have here, I split them into 2 columns. So it looks like 2 graphs is actually 4. And I wanted to highlight the batters who had better batting averages when bang signals were present. I could do that pretty easily if I just highlighted the bars themselves, but I also wanted to highlight the players' names. So what I did was first create this view, and you can see that the batter's actually hidden in here. If I show them, you can see that they're here. But simple horizontal graph again, with the batter, whether or not they have bangs, and then the batting average. And then I just looked for batters where the batting average was higher with bangs than it was without bangs. I could have created a formula probably to say if batting average is higher with bangs, then red, if not gray. But instead I just highlighted the batters' names where I saw that they had higher batting averages with bangs. But I wanted to highlight these names, and unfortunately in Tableau you can't do column level formatting other than creating maybe all of them looking exactly the same. So I could highlight all of them red if I wanted, but I couldn't do the row level formatting. So what I did was left them here but hid them, the batter names, so that I could still have them in the order that I wanted and know that they were at that level of detail for the batters. And then I created another sheet with just the battered names. Now again, you can't do row level formatting in just a simple table. So one of the ways you can get around that is to create horizontal bars again. So these are actually bar graphs for each batter from 0 to 1. And again, I'm hiding the batter name, but you can see each batter created bar graph from 0 to 1. And then, because it's a bar graph, I can individually format the different bars based on the player name, because it's at the batter level of detail. In the same exact way that I'm doing that for this graph over here, where I'm formatting the bars, I'm just doing it again here. These are just larger bars. Again, highlighting the two names, making sure they match up with the ones on this side, and then bringing them together. One of the important things that you need to keep in mind is working with padding. So if you're not familiar with padding, it's over here in the layout pane, and it indicates the number of pixels between the start of your sheet and then the kind of outline of the tile where you're putting the sheet. So default is usually 4 pixels. You can see that there's 4 on every side of the sheet except the left. So I wanted to make sure that there was 0 pixels in between the left and the right in this situation, so that it would look like one seamless graph instead of kind of two disjointed graphs. So if I were to put that 4 back in here, which is the default, you can see that there's a little bit of white space in between the two sections and doesn't look as seamless as it does when I put that 0 back in. And just keep in mind that you needed to do the 0 on both sides. So for this one, the 0 padding's on the left. And then this section is exactly the same as this one that I just explained. So what effect did the bangs have on plays? Oops. This heat map, very simple heat map. I'm just going to show you how to build something like that from scratch. So we had the bangs versus no bangs. We had the codes of the fastballs versus the off speeds. And then we have these boxes colored by the percent of times that there were bangs, and we want it to be darker red the higher the number is. So first, I'm going to put the field with the has bangs versus not on the rows, and then this is my pitch type group that I created. I'm going to put that in the columns. That has the fastball, the off speed. I'm going to remove these because I want to just focus on fastball and off speed. And then the pitch type codes is another level of detail. From here, you can pretty much throw any numeric field into the colors. So I'm just going to pick a random one. I'm going to pick hit, which is a created field. If the at-bat event was a run, then 1, else 0. So this will just be a sum of the number of at-bat events. Throw that into color, and you can see it already creates a heat map for you. And I'm going to hold Command down on my Mac. You would do Control on a Windows. I'm going to drag it into label, and that will create another level of mark for the sum of hit field instead of removing it altogether. So if I just dragged without hitting that command, it would take that sum hit away from color. So command into color, And here it's changed the color to, um, you can see it's changed it to coloring the text instead of coloring the background. Really simple fix, just change it to square. And now it's back to the background being the color and the text being at the forefront. You can change the colors here, edit colors, and pick any sort of color you want, and it will change for you. So that's a heat map, and that's pretty much what I did here. This is a scatter plot, and I'll put this in here. When you're building this at first, it will aggregate the measures, so you need to make sure that you're not doing that, and I'll show you what I mean. So I've got bang plays per game on the columns and final home runs on the rows. So final home runs on the rows and bang plays on the columns. So you can see it just takes the sum of bang plays per games and the sum of final home runs and plots them against each other. So what you'll need to do is go to analysis and uncheck this aggregate measures. And then it will show you for every level of detail in the dataset. So here it is again, my version of it. What I did was throw Astros win into color so that I could indicate instances where the color or where the Astros won with red and where they lost with gray. Then I went over to the analytics tool and I used this Trendline feature. The Trendline shows you trends if you're looking at over time, and then it will also show you correlations if you're looking at two numbers plotted against each other. And so I can actually just show you really quick. I'm going to remove them. So you drag Trendline from this analytics pane. Usually you'll start here with all of the data and the dimensions and measures. Analytics, Trendline, you can choose what kind of trendline you want. Usually I just stick with something simple like linear. And when you hover over it, you can see the r-squared value, you can see the p-value, you can see the equation. And in here you can see that because that coefficient 0.0798, that's positive, it's a positive correlation. Because the line is sloping upwards, it's positive correlation. And then in this one, you can see visually that it's just a very flat line, so no real correlation here. And finally, the bar chart of all of the games with the number of at-bats with audible bangs. So in this case, I just every single game date is on the columns, and then also one other level of detail is what third of the season that we're in. That was a simple calculated field that I created based on my own sort of calculations of when the season thirds were. So before the May 25th was the first third, the simple if-then statement. Between the 21st and the 20th of July is the second, and then there's the third, which is after that. Let's see. Then we've got the coloring of the bars, wins and losses, same as our previous coloring, and then the averages. In the averages, again, you go into this analytics. I'll remove them really quick so I can show you how it works. Average line, add it to the table, which would be one single average line across the whole season, or pane, which would be the average line for each of the thirds that I've created, and cell would be an average line for each of the individual bars, which we don't want because there's nothing to average for those since they're raw values. So I'm going to go to pane, and it will show you what the average is. And I showed this header, so I'm going to unshow it. And that's it. That's my viz. And I hope this is helpful for you guys. And one major takeaway that I would say is definitely use Figma to your advantage. It is a very powerful tool for just outlining what you want to do and keeps you on focus for the way you want your viz to turn out. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope this was helpful.